episode 42, titled Produce a Clear SAR, we turn assessment results into a decision-ready report that leadership can trust and move on. A Security Assessment Report, SAR, is not a scrapbook of raw artifacts. It is a structured narrative that explains what was tested, what was discovered, why the results matter, and what must happen next. The test of clarity is simple. A reader unfamiliar with day-to-day operations should still infer the system's risk posture and the credibility of the underlying evidence. When the SAR hits that mark, authorizing officials can weigh risk, prioritize work, and make time-bound decisions without guessing. Treat the SAR as a product with a purpose, not a formality, and every choice you make about scope, structure, and wording should serve that decision-making mission. Begin by anchoring readers with a crisp statement of objectives, scope, assumptions, and a short environment summary. Objectives name the questions the assessment set out to answer, such as confirming control implementation, verifying monitoring effectiveness, or validating remediation durability. Scope enumerates the systems, components, and interfaces assessed, including environments and timeframes, so readers can understand the coverage boundary and avoid reading beyond it. Assumptions spell out conditions accepted for the work time, synchronization sources, representative data sets, and approved access constraints, so later interpretations remain honest. The environment summary sketches architecture tiers, major services, and data sensitivity, giving non-specialists a map for everything that follows. This opening section calibrates expectations and sets the baseline against which deviations will later be judged. Methods come next, and they should be described with enough specificity to show rigor without drowning the reader. State that the team used 3 complementary modes: examination, interview, and technical testing, and explain how each mode contributed to evidence strength. Examination covers documents, configurations, logs, and screenshots that demonstrate design and operation. Interview validates understanding, clarifies intent, and links policy to practice across owners. Technical testing probes behavior directly through observation, execution, or measurement. For each control family, note representative procedures: what was inspected, which roles were interviewed, and which transactions, packets, or events were traced. The aim is transparency about how conclusions were reached, allowing agencies to evaluate sufficiency and repeatability without needing your internal work papers. Coverage then needs to be made visible. Samples, populations, constraints, and deviations must be presented so the reader can judge representativeness. Define the population for each evidence type, the total number of accounts, changes, alerts, assets, or interfaces relevant to a control, and state the sampling logic that produced the tested set. Call out constraints such as blackout windows, data retention limits, or tooling outages that narrowed what could be observed. Document any deviations from the original plan, the rationale for adjusting in the moment, and the compensating steps taken to preserve confidence. When coverage is transparent, readers understand both the power and the limits of the evidence, which is essential to fair risk decisions. With methods and coverage established, provide a succinct synthesis of overall risk posture and the key themes that emerged. A thematic view highlights patterns that single findings cannot convey, such as control maturity differences between environments, recurring gaps in change documentation, or monitoring that detects events but routes alerts inconsistently. Use restrained, neutral language and tie each theme to observed facts, not impressions. Explain the likely operational consequences of the themes if left unaddressed: degraded mean time to detect, unstable configuration baselines, or delayed incident containment, so decision-makers can translate themes into priorities. This section is a compass. It guides attention before the reader dives into the details of individual findings. Each finding should then be presented as a self-contained unit with evidence, impact, and likelihood clearly articulated. Evidence should identify the exact artifacts examined by unique identifier, date, and source so that another party can retrieve the same materials. Impact should explain the plausible adverse outcome in concrete operational terms: data exposure scope, unauthorized change potential, service availability effects, or audit trace degradation. Likelihood should be grounded in observed conditions and relevant threat models, avoiding melodrama or false precision. Where appropriate, include short narrative traces that connect cause to effect, such as how a misconfigured role led to excessive entitlements and how monitoring failed to flag the condition. Findings that read like complete stories are far easier to prioritize and remediate. Because independent verification is a cornerstone of trust, include replication steps that allow agencies to validate results. Replication does not require publishing every keystroke. It requires documenting the preconditions, the vantage points used, and the sequence of actions that yielded the observation. Specify accounts or roles needed, the systems or dashboards accessed, the query or filter parameters applied, and the expected observable outcomes. Note any data scrubbing or redaction applied to protect sensitive values, and explain how the masked outputs still prove the point. When replication steps are included, reviewers can confirm a result quickly and move to the substance of mitigation rather than disputing the existence of the issue. Severity ratings should be applied consistently and mapped to a known vulnerability scoring model to maintain comparability. If you align with the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS, or a program-specific rubric, state the mapping clearly and show how environmental and temporal factors influence the final rating. Use the same definitions across all findings, what constitutes high, moderate, or low, and avoid inflation or deflation to gain priorities. Where two findings interact to amplify risk, mention the compounding effect, but keep individual ratings defensible on their own terms. Consistency in severity builds confidence that prioritization stems from method, not negotiation. Every finding should be tied explicitly to the controls, parameters, and system components it implicates. Cite the control identifiers, the organization-defined parameters or thresholds that were applicable, and the precise assets involved by role or tag. If a control is inherited or provided by a shared service, state that relationship to avoid misdirected remediation. Explain how the control's design intent compares to the observed implementation, and trace the path from requirement to artifact so the reader can see where drift occurred. This linkage turns abstract compliance language into concrete engineering work, which is exactly what implementers need to fix issues correctly. When organizations have already deployed compensating measures or temporary mitigations, document them fairly and completely. Describe the measure's objective, scope, and evidence of operation, and explain how it reduces likelihood or impact given the current environment. Be candid about residual risk and about any dependencies that could erode the measure's value over time. If the mitigation is time-boxed, include the expiration and the criteria for replacement by a primary control. This balanced treatment encourages proactive risk reduction while keeping pressure on durable fixes, and it prevents later ambiguity about what counted as good enough during the assessment window. Remediation recommendations should be practical, prioritized by risk and effort, and written in language that engineers, product owners, and governance leaders can all parse. Begin with the outcome you seek, such as enforcing least privilege for a specific role class or hardening a configuration baseline across an environment. Then propose steps that connect directly to the observed causes. Offer options when two paths are equally valid but differ in cost or time to value, and flag dependencies that could block either path. Anchor priorities to severity and thematic risk, and include expected artifacts of completion, updated policies, configuration diffs, monitoring rules, or sample tickets, so closure is demonstrable rather than asserted. Good recommendations feel like a feasible plan, not a wish list. Cross-referencing is the skeleton that keeps the SAR upright, so maintain clean links to artifacts, identifiers, and suggested plan of actions and milestones, POAMM entries. Use stable identifiers in tables and in-text references so readers can hop from a finding to the exact evidence without a scavenger hunt. Where a finding naturally becomes a POAM candidate, propose an entry title, affected control, milestone outline, and a risk-based target date range. Record any related items to avoid duplicate tracking. This discipline shortens the time from report to action because teams can lift the references directly into their remediation systems with minimal translation. Before you finalize, apply a rigorous quality check for clarity, concision, accuracy, and internal consistency. Read passages aloud to detect convoluted phrasing that will trip text-to-speech or human presenters, and simplify where possible without losing meaning. Validate that numbers reconcile across sections, that severity labels match their narratives, and that cross-references resolve correctly. Confirm that redactions preserved evidentiary value and that no unintended sensitive data slipped through. A final editorial pass by someone not steeped in the work often reveals assumptions that insiders gloss over. Quality is not polish for its own sake. It is a control against misinterpretation at precisely the moment when decisions depend on your words. Conclude with a short, professional finish that signals readiness and proposes the immediate next step. Hold a readout rehearsal. A readout rehearsal allows the presenting team to pressure test the narrative, practice concise explanations of complex findings, and anticipate likely questions from authorizing officials. Use the rehearsal to refine slide-safe excerpts, verify that replication steps can be summarized without jargon, and align on how recommendations translate into POA and M entries. When the team can deliver the SAR story smoothly and consistently, the formal briefing becomes a decision forum rather than a debate over basics. That is the mark of a clear SAR. It brings enough light to move risk forward with confidence. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.